Hi everyone, this is Andrei Roman. I'm the CEO of AtlasIntel. Welcome to a new edition of Atlas Deep Dive. Joining me, Pedro Azevedo, our head of US coverage.
Hey Andrei, happy to be here.
And Stephanie Cunha, our incoming political analyst for the US.
Hi everybody.
Welcome to our team, Stephanie.
Thank you.
We will be discussing our latest poll for the US as we've accustomed you. This is a poll for the month of May. It's been a long time actually since our last poll because our April poll was at the beginning of April and this one comes closer to the end of the month. So quite a long time since we haven't released something on the US. I bet you're very excited and curious to see what we found out. So let's go. We sampled quite a large sample, 3,469 respondents with the method you already know, the best method out there, random digital recruitment, Atlas RDR. It is a sample that's representative on the usual suspect variables by gender, age, household income, also education, obviously region. And although we don't calibrate exactly by race, it's also representative on race. And as we start figuring out what took place with Donald Trump's approval, it seems the news aren't that great for his administration. We see a disapproval rating that shot up by 2 percentage points since April. 54.5% of Americans disapprove of his job as president, whereas the approval rating fell by 1.5 points from 46.1 to 44.5%. When we look at the evaluation of his administration, things stand quite similarly, actually a bit worse. When it comes to the excellent good rating, the drop is even more significant, not just a 1 percentage point drop as we saw with approval, but in this case, it's a steeper 5% drop from 43.4% excellent good to 38.8. The regular rating went up from 4.1 to 6.7, and the poor, very poor rating shot up by 2 percentage points from 52.2 to 54%. So, what do we make of these results? Do they surprise us? What do you think, Stephanie?
Yeah, so I would say that it's maybe not that surprising. This period is also a period where we had the tariffs announced by the Trump administration. This generated a lot of news coverage, a lot of attention, popular attention towards it. And there are data points that indicate that, maybe people are having a more negative perception of the possible consequences of these tariff policies and the sort of economic consequences that they're going to bring both to the economy and to people's individual economic circumstance. So, in April, we had the Liberation Day tariffs, and, that was a very big and bold policy measure. And we also had Trump putting a 90-day pause on these tariffs. And then we also had him renegotiating some tariff terms with China, but still maintaining relatively high tariffs. And, that generates, I guess, a bit of uncertainty, regarding what's going to happen to the economy. And, possibly that helps explain some of the more negative approval ratings and evaluations that we're observing here.
So one of the curious things about this, when we look at the sector-by-sector analysis, is that when it comes to national debt, that's actually the only dimension where the approval rating actually dropped significantly. By 5 percentage points, 47% approved of Trump's administration management of the national debt in April, and now it's just 42%. Whereas on the other dimensions, immigration, even the US economy, China-US competition, safeguarding democracy actually, improved. You don't see much change. So you either see something that's slightly positive or stability. When it comes to national debt, somehow things worsened quite a bit. And here's the sort of funny part. You'd expect that the tariffs, if they have anything positive to bring to the US, is actually, helping the budget, right? The state raises tariffs, gets money, the deficit drops. You could expect the tariffs to hurt the economy. You could expect tariffs to perhaps increase inflation. You'd expect them to affect debt in a positive, not in a negative way. So what do you make of this paradox, Pedro? What could we have at play here?
Well, Andrei, I would say, first of all, I would go back to something that we mentioned already in our previous episode when we were first talking about the idea of tariffs, when we were watching that sort of immediate impact that they might have had, which was the matter of uncertainty, right? Which is, again, sort of the way these tariffs were rolled out and then paused and then renegotiated and then rolled back. And then, it was something that felt all over the place. So even when we're talking about the potential positive impacts of the tariffs, that's something where the Trump administration may have undercut itself, at least in the public eye, with this bit of sort of chaotic rollout of the whole policy. And I would also say that the tariffs are not the only issue at play here, as we have had, it has been very relevant in the news in the last few weeks, the negotiations among the Republican House caucus on the big budget bill that's aimed at financing Trump's priorities, right? And it is a bill that has been subject to much discussion concerning how it would impact the deficit, because there is an impetus to sort of prolong and the tax cuts that Trump promoted in his first term, and also managing the cap on the deductions of state and local taxes, and basically trying to fit in there a lot of tax cuts and not exactly being able to figure out where they would sort of cut the money to finance these tax cuts. So this has also been very relevant in the news ultimately, right? And so that has also affected, not only Trump, but Republicans in general in terms of this idea of the deficit.
So I have this doubt in my mind, which is, there's negative news on the spending bill. It prompted Elon Musk to actually leave the government. That's news we have from basically today. It's very recent. My question is, do Americans, rate Trump's management of the national debt worse because they agree with Elon Musk and they want more of it? Or it's because they disagree with Musk and they think Dodge perhaps went too far? Or is just so much negative stuff on both sides, from Trump, from Elon Musk, that it seems a bit chaotic, that the overall perception, regardless of what people think, should be done to the deficit in terms of spending cuts and whatever. Maybe they think whatever is being done is not done with a process that is arranged the way it should. So maybe it's more about disorder and chaos in the communication of the policies rather than the policies themselves, whatever those policies could be.
Yeah, I think a strong indicator of perception sort of in that direction was the support we were seeing for, spending cuts more generally, and I think Doge's mission more broadly, while at the same time we were seeing in our numbers a very negative polling of Elon Musk's popularity, right? So this, I feel like it's a clue to the idea that while Americans in general support the idea of spending cuts and of limiting the spending in the federal government, that they did not perhaps approve of the way that it was being done and I mean, even of the influence that Elon Musk himself has had in this process, right?
Is, in your opinion, Stephanie, Musk's sort of distancing from the Trump administration, the announcement that he's basically leaving his job, right, at Dodge, is that kind of positive news for Trump or not really? What do you think?
I would say that in general, it is a positive development. We see that, in fact, like Pedro said, there is support from the American population to cut government inefficiency, inefficient spending.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at the image of Elon Musk specifically, the negative perception of him was increasing quite significantly. And so that sort of implies that the way that these government spending cuts were being managed wasn't what the American people were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sense, it would be a sort of a positive development for the Trump administration to have someone who didn't perform in the way that was expected to be leaving the administration.
Is Musk leaving the administration sort of humiliated from this entire adventure? I mean, he for sure lost lots of money. He attracted lots of hate all over the world. I mean, you see Tesla being boycotted in the US, but not only. At the time when Chinese car manufacturers are, boosting production like never before.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think Tesla has ever been in a worse competitive position than it is today, such that, any political cost to its operation that, the company itself acknowledges, and its official income forecast, for example. It's just so strange to my mind that you would see Elon Musk commit to this entire sacrifice from a financial standpoint, and then see a spending bill that he doesn't like and say, "I'm out." What do you guys think happened? I mean, why did he leave? Was it all about? Was it more about the cutting financial losses, or was it kind of him not being able to make the impact on the administration that he expected to have, or carry the weight that he expected to carry?
Mm-hmm.
There's quite a lot of speculation about Musk's conflicts with other members of the administration, like, for example, Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio seems more and more popular because he seems to be a guy that can get things done
Mm-hmm.
in a way that kind of satisfies both Trump and the Republican establishment, and to some degree communicate that well to the American public, even as these approval ratings are dropping, but not on issues that perhaps Rubio is closer to. So what do we think on that? Why did he leave? Why did Musk exit the administration?
Well, this has been building for a while. It's not, I feel like maybe the spending bill, the big, beautiful bill, as Trump calls it, that may have been like the straw that broke the camel's back, but it has been building a while. Like Stephanie was saying, Musk's popularity had been declining in our polling. And I feel like we saw a big moment of that was, of course, the Wisconsin election for the state Supreme Court, right?
Oh, we remember that.
Where
we got that right.
He got so involved, and
Yeah.
he decided to make himself the face of the campaign,
Mhm.
and also the face of the Trump administration there, right? As sort of, if you vote for Judge Schimmel, you are endorsing you're helping Trump do what needs to be done. And then the Democrats were able to sweep in and use, is this the guy? Like, is this the guy you want ruling you? Do you want this billionaire influencing your politics and coming in here to Wisconsin and throwing money at people to vote for Schimmel? And we saw the result of that was a 10-point win. for the more liberal candidate in a state that in the last three presidential elections has been decided by less than a percentage point. And so I feel like this drag on Musk's popularity has been growing for a while. And at the same time, like you said, he has been maybe
a drag on the administration's popularity. I mean, to the degree that Musk, goes out there to Wisconsin campaigns, spends lots of money, like he always does, fails to win the election, but not only fails to win the election, fails to win the election in a spectacular way. Few people expected, unless you're following Atlas polls, few people expected that margin of a loss, right? So to my mind, it kind of became apparent also within the administration that Musk was perhaps hurting more than he was helping when it comes to popularity ratings for the administration overall.
And that, of course,
this kind of coincides with these graphs, right? So you see national debt went up by a lot in terms of the negative rating, and that's pretty much the only thing that went up at the time when the overall approval of the administration is worsening, right? To be fair, though, I don't personally think it's only national debt. My impression on the past month and a half is that Trump is kind of reaping the results of not essentially implementing new policies that have a visible positive impact in the short run, and kind of disappointing expectations because of that. Let me be more clear. This wasn't a very clear phrase. Essentially, Trump promised to reinaugurate an era of prosperity for the U.S., right? All the people that wear the red caps, they actually believe, that Make America Great Again is something that is doable, in a way that will not take that much time or that much work, frankly. It seemed to be the case that, Trump, based on his huge charisma and aura of a guy that, is so smart and gets things so fast and can just strike deals that, a deal, what is a deal? A deal is something that you can take advantage of immediately, right? You make the deal, boom. Lots of prosperity coming in fast. That was kind of the message. It wasn't the message about we'll have to sacrifice a lot, work hard, see the results in 20, 30, 50 years. It was about make America great again now, When it comes to immigration, they actually managed to do something's really fast. There's no more immigration crisis on the border. There's not, a crisis where you see hundreds of thousands of incoming migrants this year in the U.S. That's kind of solved. It's actually kind of a problem because the problem is solved to such a degree that nobody really talks about it that much anymore.
Yeah, and there are also immigrants choosing to self-deport now as well.
Right. So it's very easy for the Trump administration to sell a success story there, and we'll see data that kind of illustrates it as well. But when it comes to virtually everything else, and in particular the economy, in particular tariffs, right? First of all, in the case of tariffs, we don't even know what the tariffs are, right? Because there's no stable policy. The tariffs are announced, then negotiations are announced, then you have some courts challenging the tariffs, and increasingly it seems like the judiciary is assuming a more relevant role in doing that. So if you don't know what the tariffs exactly are, it's even harder to figure out what their impact will be, right? And when it comes to deals with foreign countries, well, what exactly are the deal? I mean, what was announced with the UK seems more like, a rub on the back between, the Prime Minister of the UK and the US President, in a way that, kind of saves face for both of them at a very hard time when they don't really have to show to the public much in terms of, progress on the economy. That's kind of the way I see it there. So this kind of, lack of uh, feasibility of feasible evidence that the policies are implemented and they are having a strong immediate impact in terms of bringing prosperity to the U.S. To my mind, that's kind of the most problematic thing for the administration today, right? And it kind of adds and adds and adds, like so the tariffs are in a limbo that's only getting worse, and then you get the spending bill that kind of adds to that feeling of uncertainty as to what will happen to the economy, as to what the impact on the inflation will be, and it puts both consumers and businesses in a place where they're not really sure about what the future looks like. For the most part, people that voted for Trump are still very optimistic and trying to stay so, right? But there's also kind of this feeling of doubt. Is it really going in the right direction? And also, is this what we were expecting that this administration would do? It doesn't really feel like this is what we were sold in terms of promises and discourse during the campaign. So I see this as a rather complicated period for the U.S. administration. And my single most important question is, how will they get out from it? Like, what is a path forward? What is the light at the end of the tunnel? What can be done to address this inertia? So what do you guys think?
Well, it is, and I think like we see here in the time series for sort of the greatest challenges the United States faces today. I feel like we see now a lot of challenges sort of tied, right? Where we were talking, last time it was definitely the U.S. economy as we were recording. I feel like
it seems like people are less scared about the impact of the tariffs, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like Trump's not really able to adopt the tariffs in a way that is so damaging, or at least what was adopted hasn't destroyed the economy, as many were saying, for now.
Yeah, it was the April poll was taken like a week after, during the sort of chaos, the aftershocks of Liberation Day. So it makes a lot of sense that was the pressing, most damaging issues in the minds of the public back then. And now it's still, at the top of the list, but it's there alongside some other issues here. And I feel like this also shows a lot of that. Again, we're seeing the economy, we're seeing inflation, we're seeing, like we were saying, immigration, which was in January when Trump took office. We see it as, by far the most pressing issue. At 51% of Americans, and now it's dropped back down to 33%, right? So it's what we were saying before, that this crisis has sort of been solved to such a degree that it's not really that very relevant anymore. But it's there, right? And so I feel like this chart for the greatest challenges that the U.S. faces today really shows this. There are a lot of things worrying people right now. There's not one thing people are worried about. We see safeguarding democracy here at a very high rate. So people are against this idea of uncertainty, right? So that's concerning the economy, concerning the democracy. So that's sort of the problem there.
When it comes to safeguarding democracy, it's one of the, I think it's actually the only dimension that improved from our April poll. And that's really interesting. And there's another finding in the poll that's quite illustrative of this, which is a question on the rulings by federal judges to block parts of the Trump agenda, right? It's been happening with tariffs. It's been happening with immigration. It's been happening to Harvard funding. It's been happening to various things. And here you see that there's a slight majority that's against Trump, genuine interest in applying the law, 50.5%, but 47.4% of Americans think that these rulings are mostly motivated by political bias or a political interest in blocking the Trump agenda. So it kind of resonates with the finding that people tend to think it's not really okay for the judiciary to just to just start blocking elements of the Trump agenda they don't like when, regardless of what the content of that agenda is, it's something that it's within the competence of the president, and there's a democratic mandate for the president to kind of, lead the country. Then you can pay the cost. You can have midterm elections. You can have presidential. We voted the guy to do what he wants to do, not for the judges to rule whatever they want to rule. So this divided to me is quite interesting, and it kind of provides, to my mind, a scapegoat for the Trump administration going forward. That may be actually quite convenient. For example, in the case of tariffs, say, that the Supreme Court actually won't, surprisingly, maybe won't side with Trump entirely and let Trump adopt whatever tariff rates he wants. Maybe that's actually a way out for the Trump administration, saying, well, look, we didn't manage to do everything that we wanted to do, but it was because we were sabotaged in an undemocratic way. And the judiciary is kind of an agent for the Democrats. It's an anti-democratic agent in our society that needs to be controlled. Well, maybe that can actually win the Trump administration some points. And it kind of deflects the focus, right? If things don't work well because the administration is incompetent, for example, that will have a large political cost, a huge toll, if that's the perception. Mm-hmm. If things don't work because you're being sabotaged by an agent that doesn't have the best intentions, because they're biased, because they side with their political adversary, that kind of helps Trump kind of persuade the public that is what's actually taking place here, and that that's actually a reason for which he should have even more political support from the public. Even more people, supporting him in social media and in political activism to kind of put a check on the power of these perhaps corrupt, perhaps just very biased, agents in the judiciary. What do you think, Stephanie? Do you think that Trump could be successful in terms of selling such an idea to the American public going forward?
Yeah, for sure. On the matter of tariffs, for example, he's trying to negotiate trade deals right now. And the objective is to secure more favorable trade terms for the United States. But if he can't enforce, or if he's having difficulties in enforcing the tariffs and, making all of these...
If there are no tariffs, there are no deals. And if there are no deals,
the incentive...
who is the guilty person?
Yeah.
That's not Trump. I mean, I try to incorporate the tariffs so that I can secure a deal. There's no tariff, there's no deal. Go blame that judge that, blocked my agenda.
Yeah, the incentive to... he loses leverage, basically. So the incentive to make concessions and create agreements that are favorable to the U.S. decreases. But not only on that front, also on the migration front, for example, Trump can argue that, the judiciary is disabling him from deporting dangerous people who can harm the country, and that is a discourse. Democrats have been on this front of defending due process, which is also something that the courts are doing.
To my mind, the Kilmer Garcia case, which was kind of like the big scandal for the Democrats, that was so much in the media hotspot for the past few weeks. It seems to me that didn't really help the Democrats as much as they think it did. There's, from what I understand, a very crystallized perception on the Republican side that dealing with immigration was a national emergency, that actually dealing with rising violence and crime is a national, priority. So, to my mind, picking that particular person in that particular circumstance wasn't perhaps the most convincing strategy. There was a U.S. senator traveling to El Salvador, trying to make the case that this was a humanitarian emergency. Some photos popped up of him, drinking margaritas with Kilmar Garcia in a setting that perhaps the Salvadorian government kind of choreographed, in a very smart way. It doesn't seem to me that the needle really moved on immigration in a way that is that favorable to Democrats, with perhaps the asterisks that there is a new item on the agenda which regards international students. Visas being revoked for Chinese students, visas being revoked for Harvard students, in a way that seems more and more aggressive, and where perhaps things aren't as convincing. I mean, it's one thing for you to deport illegal migrants that came in without a visa, that are perhaps criminals, that have come in huge numbers, and that don't provide perhaps such a clear immediate contribution that is positive to the US society. Although that's a point that can also be debated quite a bit, because these are people that usually earn very little for the jobs they perform, because they don't have any sort of social protections, and they kind of operate in a legal gray zone. So that is a point that can be disputed. But when it comes to students, I mean, kicking Harvard students out isn't perhaps the most popular of policies, I would say. And that may perhaps start, moving the needle a bit on immigration, although we don't really see it in the data now. I'm kind of sort of maybe projecting this going forward and thinking that even one aspect of the Trump administration that is currently positive could slowly erode if the overall trend also continues to be negative. But going back to
there's also there's just the idea here that you mentioned the international students and the Abrego Garcia case. There's the idea here that you have to be politically savvy about these things, right? I'm sure that the Democratic senator that went to El Salvador, I'm sure he believes that it's a humanitarian situation, a crisis that needs to be addressed. But you have to know, in your position as a senator and as a highly visible political person, what kind of image that's going to cast, right? So maybe, if the Democrats choose immigration as an issue where they're going to, try to press Trump on, then you have to sort of figure out, exactly this, right? Is it better for me to be talking and focusing on these cases, or is it better to be focusing on the case of, international students, where that might, elicit some more sympathy? And I just feel there's this idea that maybe the courts may be scapegoated by the Trump administration. I feel like this underestimates maybe the idea that the people can be mad at absolutely everything at the same time. The people can be furious at the Democrats and at the courts and at Trump at the same time. And I feel like maybe that's what we may start seeing, given the current, economic policies. And again, we come back to the tariffs, right? And we have a very interesting section here on what people are feeling about tariffs and about the economy in general. And I'd love to hear more from Stephanie on this, actually, because this was actually a big part of her of what she contributed to this month's questionnaire.
Yeah, so I think it's the next slide. Yeah, so this question basically is like a 360, and it looks at all of the how people are perceiving the potential impact of the tariffs on several economic categories. I think what's interesting to note over here is that all of them, I mean, most of them have a pretty a high percentage of the worsen category. So a lot of people think that these categories will worsen with the tariffs in the future.
So the worst is availability of products. No more Shine,
Yeah.
Alibaba.
No more
62%.
Exactly.
American girls are gonna have only
But it's
two
also
dolls instead
interesting.
of $30.
People are also worried about inflation, as maybe they should, based on very high inflation in the US under the Biden administration, for example. 60% think that the tariffs will hurt the US because of higher inflation. And then the only item where you kind of have a tie with a slight positive rating is the US manufacturing industry, 43 to 39%. That's kind of what Scott Bessent has been trying to argue. That look, we need these tariffs because yes, some people will suffer. Yes, we'll pay higher prices, but there's a significant segment in our society that we need to protect because there are communities that have hurt, and there needs to be an end to the never-ending collapse of the blue collar standards of living in our society, perhaps. But overall, it doesn't look that great, does it, Stephanie?
No, it doesn't. And I think it's also interesting that you even see famous podcasters like Joe Rogan even sort of casting some doubt on, maybe that it's too extreme. These policies might be too extreme. What are going to be the consequences of that? And
you may also end up with a scenario where all of these things get worse and maybe the jobs don't come back because of technological change, because of just how huge the discrepancies are in terms of costs, production costs within the US versus a place like, Cambodia. The amount of taxes you have to increase to transform these US manufacturing industries in something that's really competitive.
Yeah, and like
huge.
You were saying earlier about how the idea that the Trump's base would think that we can make America great again and it's going to be quick and it's going to be easy and we're doing it fast. I think like that would also play into it. Right? We're even in the best scenario where this actually helps and strengthens the U.S. manufacturing industry, even if Trump manages to sort of, we're going to bring Apple factories here and we're going to make the iPhone in the United States. That's also not going to happen overnight, right? Even in the best case scenario, there's years there of building the proper infrastructure and training the workforce. So that's even that people are going to feel that hurt for a while as the economy adjusts, even in the best case scenario for the Trump administration here.
And what we're seeing is that, when you kind of sum it up into a for or against position, it's pretty much at the average of all of the dimensions that we saw in the previous slide. You sum up 45% that are completely against the tariffs with the 11% that are mostly against. Well, that gets you close to 56, right? And that's pretty much the average of the dimension by dimension analysis as to what the impact of these tariffs will be. So 56% in against, that's a considerable majority, right? And that kind of correlates well also with the disapproval rating. Disapproval rating right now stands at 54%, 56% on against tariffs, when the tariffs are perhaps the single most discussed issue of the Trump administration today. To my mind, it's not really that surprising that the rejection rate would come closer and closer to the negative assessment of tariffs, when this is what this administration has been debating for pretty much the past 4 months, right? And in the process, the opinion on the issue hasn't really improved. I don't think that the Trump administration has been able to sell the tariffs as something that's positive. I mean, they've tried, but they weren't able to do it. The public isn't yet buying it. And so the more they kind of push, the more it seems like this will have a political toll on the administration. And it kind of creates the question in my mind as to, will they continue? I mean, will they continue doing this? Or will they maybe try to shift to something else? Maybe use the opportunity of the judiciary blocking the most aggressive tariffs, negotiate some small deals with some trading partners, and just move on to a more positive agenda. Because if they continue, it seems to me like things can actually get even worse than today. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, we're seeing here something that will be a big problem for Trump now, because even during his first term, when his approval ratings were low, were record lows, he still had generally good ratings on the economy. He was seen as someone that could handle the economy.
It's more a question of style than substance, right?
Yes,
we don't really
exactly.
like the way he speaks, the way he behaves himself, but he's doing a good job in terms of the economy. So not that bad after all, right?
Yeah, and now we're not seeing that. We're seeing people being
yes and no, because the economy is not doing bad yet, right? I mean, I think the point where I slightly disagree is it will get much worse if a recession comes, for sure. But for now, there's no recession in sight. There's increasing speculation as to the impact of the tariffs, but if the tariffs don't even come to fruition, then how are you going to get the recession because of the tariffs, right? So then it becomes more of a question of deflecting the attention and reframing the argument and moving to other topics. To my mind, though, if he sticks with, no, I will totally go to trade war with China and with Europe and with the rest of the world all at the same time, and then you have an economic toll that maybe results in a recession, well, that is really, I think, on Armageddon scenario in terms of what can happen with the approval ratings. Because the scenario where the trade deal just comes right away and the US is more prosperous next month because of this, I think it now seems more and more far-fetched.
Yeah, I think that it would be definitely trying to pivot and sort of project this image that things are getting done and that we are improving the U.S.'s situation in the international economic context, and also, because trade deals in the traditional sense, they aren't easy to accomplish very quickly. You see difficulties with the EU. There are very sort of fundamental differences between both countries in terms of digital regulation, consumption taxes, and a bunch of items that make agreement on meaningful items very difficult. You also have difficulties with Japan, for example. Japan is going to have an election soon, and so projecting an image of
Japan is really pissed off with Trump right now, right? I mean, if there's any country that feels they got screwed basically in this entire thing, was Japan. Japan treated Trump really well, and the entire process they tried to be friendly during the trade negotiations. And now that the tariffs aren't really coming into fruition with their neighbors in the Asian region, they feel they got hit really hard and unfairly. In particular, the car industry in Japan is feeling a very hard hit from the Trump tariffs. Companies like Nissan. That brings me to a new issue that I kind of want to discuss, which is foreign policy. Relations with Japan are not at the high level right now. Not their greatest point, but when it comes to the other major topics on foreign policy, they also seem to be pretty negative for the Trump administration right now. War in Ukraine, 50% of the public thinks that the administration is doing a terrible job in terms of that. Just 29% excellent. Well, according to Trump, the war in Ukraine was going to end even before he would become president. So that's not exactly surprising. He hasn't been able to push the Ukrainians and the Russians to negotiate. Actually, it seems like the war is getting worse in terms of the number of deaths, casualties, bombardments, aerial bombardments on major Ukrainian cities, with a humanitarian catastrophe, in sight. And when it comes to Gaza, Israel, Hamas, the humanitarian catastrophe is already a reality with famine and kids dying of hunger, babies dying of hunger in Gaza. Also not really looking really well on the U.S. administration right now. In spite of really good relations with Israel that perhaps one would have expected could have led to Trump being more influential in terms of achieving a solution there. And it doesn't seem like the solution isn't coming in Gaza either, right? Now we're seeing, Trump trying to strike a deal with Iran. But guess what? When it comes to Iran, people weren't really supporting him making peace. They wanted, most of his base wanted him to bomb Iran, not to make peace with Iran. So to me, it seems like foreign policy isn't going that great at this time, even as though Marco Rubio is securing himself as one of the most well-respected, well-seen figures of the administration. So what do you think about that, Stephanie? Is this going to hurt Rubio? Is there potential for foreign policy to become once again sort of a positive anchor for the U.S. administration? Doesn't seem like it's a positive anchor right now.
Yeah, it depends on the metrics that you use, but if it's deals that you get done, then maybe the Iran point will be positive, but it depends on the voters or the people that you're looking at. In the Russia sphere, I would say that it's not very favorable for the Trump administration now. It's sort of reinforcing the image of the tariff scenario. You have a lot of threats and then, retreating on them. And you see Trump trying to apply that with Putin, but it's not working. And
now we have a 2-week deadline.
Yeah.
But then again, we had the I will become president deadline, and you have to stop the war before I become president. That seemed to be a more scary deadline than this. And it didn't really work.
There seems to be, in general, an issue with overconfidence and coming from Trump himself, right? From exactly this, the idea that he could just say that, oh, I'm going to fix the war, before I become president, or, that I'm going to impose all these tariffs and China and the EU are going to come running asking to renegotiate the tariffs. And then what China and the EU actually did was prepare to retaliate. And so this idea that he is going to sort of say things and impose a deal on people, right? Even on Netanyahu, right, and Israel, this idea that he would be able to put a stop to the war, and he still hasn't had much to show for it. And I feel like that definitely can hurt Rubio because, as Secretary of State, of course, he has a lot of power over the actual negotiations, over the deals, but he still has to get the approval from Trump, and he's still acting on Trump's, commands and Trump's objectives in the foreign sphere. So he basically has to, run with that overconfident attitude and try to deliver something fast because Trump said it was going to happen fast. And then if he doesn't, it makes him look, to the public, now thinking in a more thinking even perhaps for 2028 as a potential candidate, as a potential successor for Trump? Are people going to look at Rubio and see, a guy that can deliver? Maybe not, but that would be because of maybe he is having to deliver on the very high expectations of Trump, which might be seen as some overconfidence.
That's a great point, Pedro, because if you think about all of these issues, I mean, the trade deficit that the US has is a product of economic policies that took place over decades, right? It's a model of free trade that kind of both parties adopted that resulted in a series of, trade agreements for liberalization that was centered on, the role of the WTO, on NAFTA. And these are things that took place over decades. And it's difficult to believe that you can fix, the US trade deficit in a year, just simply because of the great deals that you're going to strike. And somehow Trump sold that idea. And somehow I think we're now seeing that, it's in practice, even as you try to strike this trade deal and this other trade deal, I think it's going to be very difficult for him to solve the situation in a way that is really credible, right? And in a way that delivers lots of economic benefits for the US in the short run. I find it very difficult to see how that will take place. And it appears to be the case that the American public thinks the same way. So look at this. In your opinion, how long will it take to resolve the trade tensions between the US and China? Several years, 31%. Never, 22.4%. Right? Don't know, 13.7%. People that think that they can be resolved fast in a month, 6%. In 6 months, 17%. A year is 9%, and the year is actually not. The year is pretty long. Thinking that you can have tariffs dragging on the economy and perhaps provoking a recession, a year doesn't look great there. So, increasingly, I think people are kind of waking up to the reality that some of these issues, be it trade, being geopolitical tensions, being, Iran's nuclear arsenal, be it, Gaza, the Ukraine war, these are very difficult issues to solve fast, right? They're very difficult issues to solve well. I mean, fast? Well, solve them well and solve them fast seems quite a conundrum, right?
The thing is, people are angry, right? The people are very angry at Biden for inflation and for how the cost of living impacted their lives. And Trump came in and promised that there was a quick fix and that it was just that Biden was doing everything wrong and he was going to do everything right. And so he's going to solve all your problems. And exactly now you have to deal with the reality that maybe it's not going to be that fast. It's not going to be that simple. And so it's very like that. That's where we see, the approval rating for Trump, going down on the approval and the disapproval going up. That's what we're seeing. Perhaps the people dealing with this reality that, I thought this was going to be easier. I thought this was going to be faster.
And increasingly, you see on the economy. The economy was perhaps Trump's strongest sell in the election, perhaps after migration. We were comparing Trump with Harris all the time. Consistent answers showing that Americans trust Trump better than Harris on migration and the economy. Well, look at this. In the first quarter of 2025, the U.S. economy shrank by 0.3%. In your opinion, which administration's policies are primarily responsible for this result? The Biden administration, 31%. The Trump administration, 60.4%. And that's a very strong negative result in this Atlas poll, wouldn't you say, Stephanie?
Yeah, I would, especially given the importance of the economy for Trump's electoral campaign in 2024. And I would say that this is a further confirmation of the frustration that the population is feeling towards the administration. We have so many people acknowledging that maybe the sort of anti-establishment image that Trump proposed in his campaign isn't the solution. And I also think it's interesting to note in the crosstabs that the Republicans are a bit more split than the Democrats. And there are people, saying
31% of the Republicans. It's quite a lot.
Yeah.
31. There's barely a majority of Republicans thinking that the Biden administration is more responsible than the Trump administration for U.S. economic growth receding in the previous quarter. That's a very large, big, alarming red light for this administration, to my mind. I mean, if Republicans think that the economy is doing worse and the person to blame that for is Trump, I mean, that puts the current numbers in perspective onto it makes us believe that the deterioration or the erosion of popularity can just continue based off of this, right? If you have only 50% of Republicans approving of the Trump administration as a result of economic mismanagement, or what they perceive to be economic mismanagement, that can be a political cataclysm for this administration, I would say. And so
I feel like the result of that is very clear. If we look, we finally added a generic ballot question to our poll, in anticipation of the midterms next year. And the first result we have here is impressive. It's like a landslide level, 9-point margin for Democrats in the generic ballot. Of course, we're very, very far away from the midterm elections. There's still a lot of ground to cover. We're not saying at all that this is how it's going to shake up, but I feel like it's a very strong illustration of where the sentiment with Trump and with Republicans is right now. And I feel like this sort of sums up what we've been talking about, regarding tariffs and regarding the infighting among Republicans about the spending bill and, the economic results, the economic anxiety. I feel it's all, it's crystal clear in here, right? At this moment, the Republicans are in a kind of dangerous position.
Of Republicans that say that they would vote for the Democratic candidate in the upcoming midterm elections. And you have only 35% of independents saying that they would vote for the Republican candidate. And you virtually have no Democrats saying that they would vote for the Republican candidate. So, this is alarming. If I were part of the Republican establishment right now, I would be pretty alarmed about these numbers here.
Especially coming from the most accurate pollster in America.
Yeah, let's see if the people watching this still believe that, given how negative these results are. But that's what the data shows. So going back to, we talked about foreign policy, we talked about tariffs, and these are things that I think really help explain a lot what has been happening with Trump's approval rate, in terms of it eroding quite fast. But there's another side to the story that I think may also have quite significant impact, or may have had already some significant impact, which is the appearance of certain conflicts of interest between the president's kind of business dealings and the power he has in his role as president. here we have a question that asks about cryptocurrency ventures in particular, asking the public if they believe that creates a conflict of interest. 59% say yes, 30% say no, and 10% say don't know. What do you make of these results, Stephanie?
Yeah, I think that people are aware of the potential conflicts of interest that might exist for this president, and I think that it also goes to show how visible all of this is. Trump had a crypto dinner for the top buyers of his coin, at his golf club. You have there was a company, a Mexico-based shipping company that bought Trump, the Trump meme coin, with the explicit aim of advocating for fairer trade relations with the administration, with the U.S. So I think that it really demonstrates an awareness of the population about all of this and the sort of involvement that the president has in the private sphere, but also in the public sphere, and the potential problems that could imply.
So, lots of negative news. Is there any way out? Maybe perhaps based on the policies that the Trump administration is currently supporting? Let's look at this. Are you in favor or against the following policy proposals made by Donald Trump? Eliminating DEI programs from the federal government appears with a 44% strongly in favor, 2% mostly in favor, but guess what? 51% strongly against, more than I would have expected, perhaps, based on previous polling on related topics. Dismantling or cutting spending from staff from certain federal agencies, 42% in favor, 43% most against, more split, but mostly against 9%. And these are the most popular ones, right? When you look at the other end of these, of this list, resettling Palestinians living in Gaza and neighboring countries, territorial concessions to Russia, tariffs. Increasingly, it appears that there isn't really much left in terms of the Trump agenda at this point in time, where a large majority of the American public supports it. And that is quite surprising. For example, mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. Immigration is still the best, dimension for Trump when you look at sector by sector analysis. But when it comes to the specific policy of mass deportation, we've increasingly seen, students also get deported, visas getting canceled. Even here, it appears that the direction of public opinion is shifting because people are starting to perceive, some of the voters that before were supporting these policies, they're starting to perceive that perhaps it's going a bit too far. And so if it's going a bit too far, they have an increasingly nuanced perception of the topic, mostly against, for example, here on mass deportation of undocumented migrants, is where this shift actually resides. It's this segment of 10% that kind of explains the overall result. So how does the U.S. administration salvage this, Stephanie? What if you were, an advisor on the Trump cabinet right now? You're looking at these numbers; they're not looking great. You're looking at your best policies in theory on migration. Support even for those policies is dropping. What would you advise the president to do? What should Trump do to get out of this? Is he digging a hole for himself that will be difficult to escape? Can he stop digging it? How does he do it?
Yeah, I think that he has to be careful with going too far. Yes, immigration is an issue that he's generally popular with. But you look at, for example, ending birthright citizenship for children of undocumented immigrants, that's already less popular than just the mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. And so he has to have some certain caution with the nature of the immigration policy that he's implementing, and the same thing with international students, and meddling with the visa allowances and permissions. It is less straightforward to craft a narrative of a national emergency in those cases, and so in that sense, it could be less appealing and convincing for the American public. And so that should be something that he has to be careful with. And
caution seems to me like the antithesis of what Trump stands for.
Mhm.
Right? Caution.
yeah,
Trump is aggressive. He's determined. He projects strength because of very strong convictions that he has. He doesn't really project caution, I would say. He projects perhaps genius if things go well, based on very aggressive moves, right? At least that's what we kind of see in terms of style. So based on that, I am a bit curious to think, Pedro, what you think. If he backtracks and starts, to seem like he's a bit more careful and a bit more moderate, does that help him or does it actually hurt him even more, because he's kind of already lost a significant chunk of the moderates, independents and moderate Republicans that will not easily re-adhere to his image. They kind of were there opportunistically to get rid of, the Biden administration, and because they didn't like Kamala, so kind of to prevent a greater harm that perhaps they thought Kamala represented. Maybe those voters won't come back. Wouldn't he actually risk his radical base if he were suddenly going to turn more moderate? Just because, Stephanie advised him to be, more caution, more poise. Couldn't that strategy actually backfire and have him demobilize, this segment of American society that is the segment that actually catapulted him to power because of this?
Can I just add something first? I don't think it's necessarily being more moderate. I think it's being more strategic about... you can go very hard on the deportation of undocumented immigrants and the whole criminals narrative. And just because you don't focus on international students or birthright citizenship doesn't mean that it's weak or, not...
I get it. Focus on the illegals, not on the Chinese Harvard students, right?
Yeah.
That's not strategic. It's not.
No, I agree completely with Stephanie. I think there's this idea that you need to be strategic, right? And that I feel like there's a difference between the public face and what you're doing in the background. And I feel like there would be a possibility of acting more strategically in the background while maintaining that public image of confidence and of always pushing forward, never admit defeat, always claim victory. And so, like, for example, in the tariff front, like you suggested earlier, Andrei, where you can be like, oh, the tariffs are going great, and you secure, some 2 or 3 trade deals, and you tout them as huge victories, but you move on and you claim it was a huge victory and move on to the next thing. And I feel like that's really important if Trump wants to win ground back, because I also, I agree with you that he has to keep up that image of being, confident and that he's a genius and that he can pull off all these deals and that he's solving everything. And it's more than
You
just
have a
his style. It's
trademark. You have
delivering
to-
on his
Yeah.
promises, right? On his campaign promises of being like, "Oh, I'm going to fix everything." So there is. I feel I would advise him in this case to, like Stephanie said, on the background, be more strategic about things, but on the forefront, keep acting as if everything's going great. I'm doing exactly what I always said I would do, and keep moving forward. And then how do you move forward? Is you regain some control of the narrative, right? The tariffs issue, it's gone. We're the numbers we're seeing here is like, it's really hard to fight back from this. So, and it gives again this impression of uncertainty, of chaos, of people don't know what the tariffs are and what are the tariffs being negotiated, and is it paused, is it gone, is it going to come back? Move on to something that shows that you have everything under control, right? And then again, otherwise this entropy just sort of spreads everywhere. I mean, this polling on policies, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? I don't think that people suddenly soured completely on, DEI and on mass deportation of undocumented immigrants, which were policy proposals that were more popular in our previous polling. I feel like this is just the chaos around the economic issue that's so important, that's sort of dragging down the whole administration with it, right? So the important thing here would be to move on, acting as if everything's fine and you're a genius and you've done a great deal, but move on from this and move on to some safer ground where you can actually claim to be, in charge and in control, and show that you actually know what you're doing.
Yeah, and there's also this concept of muzzle velocity in his strategy, which is a way for him to, move forward with a bunch of initiatives and show that he's doing a lot of things. And at the same time, it works to sort of distract Democrats, and they sort of tend to cling to a lot of the things that he does without looking at the bigger picture, and what Americans are sort of most concerned about. And so not only on that front, but just the muzzle velocity strategy is a good way to also disorient the opposition.
So in recent Atlas polling and polling in general, the Democrats have been taking a beating like never before, right? People have an overwhelmingly negative view of the party. They don't think that the party has convincing leaders. They don't really see how the Democrats are able to do anything consistent or powerful enough to, bar the Trump agenda. And you can see some of the results here are, if anyone was suspecting this was a bias poll because it's not good for Trump, look at the Democrats. Democrats facing a crisis of leadership, 85%. Democrats don't know how to effectively oppose Trump, 79%. Democrats have systematically betrayed some of their longstanding constituents, 65%. Out of touch, 64%. Woke discourse, 54%. So these are really bad numbers for the Democrats, right? But one thing I want to attract attention to, though, is that's one thing to, see the Democrats take a beating. Perhaps that's overdue from their own constituents, given how they lost the last election, given how poor the Biden administration was on so many things. We haven't even talked about Biden's health issues that were just revealed, and the book that came out. But it's one thing to see this, and it's another thing to think, because of this, the Republicans are secure, and they will continue to administer huge electoral defeats to the Democrats going forward. Why? Well, guess what? It's anger. Just like the Democrats were angry at their own party and they demobilized in the last election and they didn't turn out and vote in the numbers that perhaps before they did. Underperformance in the Black American population and the young vote. That's a huge part of the story when it comes to why Kamala Harris lost the election. That there's nothing in this that kind of preserves the Republicans from a similar defeat in the midterms or in the next presidential election if the tide of anger turns against them, right? Politics is very volatile and increasingly so, right? And there is one, signal here that I think is really interesting, which is, okay, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama now once again topped Trump and the favorability poll. But the most shocking thing here, though, is AOC, 46% positive, 44% negative. Biden is down there with, 55% disapproval. Hillary with 59% disapproval, the single most hated, relevant leader in American politics still, right? And somehow
alongside Gavin Newsom, who's also there, completely lost.
But somehow you see AOC emerge from this. And why does this happen? Well, I think it happens because she is a Democratic leader that Democrats look at as a potential winner in the future, not as someone that was obviously a loser, not as someone who lost the election, like Kamala Harris, that did a poor job, like Joe Biden or Gavin Newsom. I mean, AOC is pretty much the only significant, Democrat leader that has mass popular appeal today. And as such, you don't like the Trump administration. You look at the opposite side. Who is out there? AOC, well, that's kind of a beacon of hope for the Democrats, and it's starting to show. And that may be more problematic for many Republicans will look at this and be like, sure, there's no way. I don't think so. I think, to the degree that a very negative perception consolidates on the Trump administration, don't be surprised as to, the, improving favorability of some of the major Democratic leaders today, as much as some of them up to very recently were extremely unpopular, including AOC. So the fact that the AOC is kind of taking advantage of this problematic moment for the Trump administration to secure her ratings, I would say that's another alarming sign for the Republicans in the immediate future, particularly thinking about the midterm elections and already also starting to think about implications on the next presidential race. Thinking about AOC and what she's been doing, Stephanie, do you notice anything that, we could point to in her strategy and her behavior that can explain this? Or is it just, I thought most talkly about, the background scenario as helping her, but in terms of her strategy, has she done anything that you notice?
Yeah, I mean, for starters, she is Latina, so I think that also gives her an advantage if she were to run in 2028 with sort of a swing voter group. But in terms of concrete actions, she recently did this oligarchy tour with Bernie Sanders, across the nation, drew relatively large crowds, and it really reflected her image, her platform, which is a more progressive, yes, but also more anti-establishment, a populist discourse that kind of mirrors what Trump did, but on the other side of the political spectrum. And so, and she was also sort of talking about Elon Musk's presence in the government and, really emphasizing his negative experience and performance there, and emphasizing the narrative that maybe the Trump government is the establishment now. There are, she was talking about how there are, rich billionaires in the government sort of manipulating what it does and, benefiting the rich, leaving the poor behind. And so really trying to recapture those working class voters that were so crucial to the Trump coalition in, in his elections. And so in that sense, I would say that it's pretty threatening to the Trump administration.
Pedro, what do you think?
I mean, I agree completely with Stephanie. I think that we're seeing here. I mean, we've talked about it, right? And we have somewhere in our poll the idea of if she were to run in 2028. At this moment, I don't get that impression, and I don't think that she's going to run, and I maybe don't think she should run for president. But I feel like this shows her approval rating shows a style, some way for the Democrats to get out of this graph, right? Out of again, like we said,
at least it's something new, right? At least it's something fresh.
Yes, exactly. This, after seeing the Democratic Party dealing with Biden for the last 4 years and how he. The entire drama around whether he would drop out or not, even after that terrible debate performance. And I feel like that really highlighted this idea that Democrats, exactly as we have here, the criticism that most people agree with here is the Democratic Party is facing a crisis of leadership, right? And so what we're seeing here is, like you said, something different. It's something that points to change, and that's not the same old people saying the same old things. It's, she's young, she's energetic, and she is in the front lines, right? She's touring the country with Bernie Sanders, but she's also, in Congress every day and, exactly in the front lines against the Republicans. And so she ticks all the boxes here in this idea of, the crisis of leadership. Democrats don't know how to effectively oppose Trump's agenda. Democrats have betrayed their constituents. And so she ticks all the boxes here.
It's like, hell yeah. I agree with all of these.
And I would also point out that in this graph, of course, we still have a majority agreeing that the woke discourse has gone too far, but it's much less than the other criticisms of the Democratic Party, right? So the big problem with Democrats right now is not necessarily the progressive woke discourse. It's more this idea that they're out of touch, that they don't have leadership, that they don't know what they're doing. So, and I feel like she, like you said, she agrees with all of that. She's trying to change the Democratic Party from the inside. And so, again, I don't think that she will run or that she should run for president. But, I feel she has still a very long career ahead of her. She's still very young. But this is a bellwether for the sort of style and the sort of action that will get people rallying around a Democratic candidate, someone that can actually show some opposition to the Trump administration.
Yeah, and just to complement what you said, I think that it's still different, but her social media presence is different, I would say, compared to most Democrats. She has a lot of lives on Instagram, for example. She spends like 2 hours just talking,
she's building a social
answering
media presence,
questions.
not unlike, what Trump managed to do.
Yeah, and I mean, it's even closer in a way because there's a lot of, the Instagram lives, like Stephanie was saying, and answering questions on her Instagram page and talking to people on Twitter. She's engaging with people, right? She's out there, she's talking. It shows, again, that she's open, and again, goes to this idea of, Democrats betray their constituents. AOC is always right there talking to her constituents and sorting people out.
As a result of all of this, though, is if AOC is kind of the beacon of hope, knowing how rejected she was until very recently, and also kind of the radical nature of her discourse so far, I am not sure how much that actually helps Democrats. I'm not sure if that's really a way out. I mean, it's kind of the way out because they don't have other leaders. But if that's the only way forward, is it really a way forward? It's kind of like a rhetorical question. But going back to Trump, and we are running out of time, so this will be my final question for you guys. I've tortured you enough. It seems to be the case in our data and in most polls that are frankly serious polls. There are also some polls that are not that serious. But in the serious polls out there, including ours, that there is a trend of a downfall in popularity. It's accelerating. It's getting worse, in my opinion, based on what I'm seeing here. And there's reason to believe that it will continue to drop. What can be done? What would you do to reverse it? Can it be reversed? How?
Well, I think we've covered that somehow, really, in the idea of sort of moving past the tariff issue, because that, like Stephanie was saying, the idea of sort of muzzle velocity and stunning the opposition into silence. And the Trump administration, I feel like they haven't been able to do that over the last since Liberation Day, because they've gotten completely muddled in the tariff discourse and the practicalities of the tariffs. And so first of all, it would be to move past this because it's crippling the
Declare
image
victory,
of the
move on, right?
Yeah. And again, sort of try to regain control of the narrative that way.
And when they move on, Stephanie, what would you move on to? I mean, okay, we dealt with China, we signed a trade deal, everyone's happy, the US says it was a victory, China says it was a victory, whatever. The economy doesn't go into a recession. What's next, though? I mean, is that enough? What should be next?
Yeah, that's a difficult question for sure. I think
I love asking hard questions.
I think that, when we look at the top issues, economy, actually safeguarding democracy is at the top as well.
I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, but also healthcare increased a bit. And so I think that he really has to focus on not allowing Democrats to build a good sort of front to attack him on. On the healthcare sense, Republicans already tend to not have a very good sort of evaluation on that front. And so really, emphasizing the mega bill or trying to conceal some of the criticisms that may come from that, especially on the Medicaid front. Democrats are already running ads on how that could compromise, the healthcare of many of the people who voted for Trump. And so crafting a convincing narrative on that front and making sure that he still projects the image that he is, aware of voters' concerns and is representing their interests. And, I guess also on the sense of the economy, have something new, have something bold, have something, that will stir attention, but that also kind of guarantees that you can declare competence and victory in the end. Yeah, I guess those are some points.
One last thing I would add just is also, I think it's important to recalibrate expectations here, because we're talking about a very divided country and Trump is a very divisive figure. And so if we're talking about reversing this trend, you got to think, if he goes back to a 50-50 approval rating, that's great for him, right? Trump is not going to go to like to get to 60% approval in the current political climate, and with Trump being as established a figure and as divisive a figure as he is, I think when we're talking about reversing this trend, we're talking to maybe going back to 50-50, getting 51-52% approval. That would already be fantastic in the current political climate.
Yeah, and to that, what I would say is, if the economy is no longer a major concern because you've solved that through quick negotiations, maybe they weren't as impactful as they were presented at the beginning. The tariff rate isn't that high as a result of it. The trade flows haven't changed that much, but maybe they've changed marginally. Whatever happens there, as long as you are able to maintain, the U.S. economy on a growth path, not get into a recession, I think that would allow the U.S. administration to extract itself from a very dangerous situation. And going back to the idea of the culture war, I mean, things like safeguarding democracy looking as one of the single best topics for Trump right now. I would go back to that. I mean, on the culture war, it appears to be the case that on many issues in the U.S. right now, Trump's discourse and the Republican discourse is more in sync with what the majority thinks, than Democrats. I mean, think about the whole thing, the whole debate around gender ideology, and trans women in sports, right? On trans women in sport, if that's the debate, I mean, that's a debate that I think the Republicans win, based on public opinion data. It's just that it's hard to make that salient when people are scared about the recession. The economy is doing great, One problem, though, is that it's not just the economy; it's also a very difficult geopolitical context all around. China with huge ambitions, Russia with huge ambitions, Israel in a very difficult situation from all possible perspectives, military, neighbors, political tensions domestically. So as I'm saying this, I also think about it's going to be tough. It's not going to be easy. And it kind of puzzles me as to how fast this administration was in terms of kind of digging itself in this kind of intractable situation at this point. They could have been more careful, I believe. I mean, they could have promised a bit less. They could have offered expectations that are a bit more realistic. But at least in terms of the time frame of the things that they wanted to do. We'll solve the war in Ukraine. We won't do it in 2 weeks. We won't do it before Trump assumes office. But we'll try to work hard on that issue. We'll try to address the U.S. trade deficit. It was created over decades. It will take us a bit of time. Be patient. It's gonna be an interesting ride. But that discourse of the interesting ride wasn't really what the administration talked about. It was always a very quick, quasi-miraculous fix.
You said it yourself, Andrei. Caution is not his style.
Well, we'll see what happens next. It was a pleasure to have you both here. Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you, Pedro.
Thank you very much, Andrei. It was great.
Thank you all, and we'll see you again soon, hopefully, for our next edition of Atlas Deep Dive.